Welcome to Brave Inflections, and thank you very much for visiting the website. Thank you for watching this video. I'm really excited today. I've got a very interesting lady. I'm interviewing Priscillah Mabelane. She is the Executive Vice President of the Energy Business for Sasol. Very important job, and we're going to talk leadership today. Priscillah, can I just start by asking you to introduce yourself a little bit and just give us a little bit of a background before I jump into the questions?
Claudelle, thanks so much, and thanks as well to your viewers who are going to spend time with you and I. As you've mentioned, I'm currently working for Sasol as an executive vice president. Prior to that, I was the CEO of BP Southern Africa. I've got quite a broader experience in a number of businesses where I started my articles at Ernst & Young as an article clerk, qualified years ago as a chartered accountant, and pursued the CFO role until I joined BP as a CFO, then decided to pivot into more the commercial part of the business, which is more strategy formulation and leadership.
That's quite a mouthful, and I'm quite intimidated. But we're talking leadership, Priscillah. Can I ask you to maybe just start off by giving us your definition of leadership?
I suppose that question is quite broad, and everyone has a separate definition, and you can also bring the more academic definition, and I'll talk about it from our perspective. I think first of all, I'm not going to spend a lot of time more on the technical side of it, which is the what, where you define a strategy, a vision for the business, and you ensure that you build capabilities across it with your team to deliver the strategy. So that for me is part of the what, which is quite easy and much more difficult these days with a lot of changes. But you've got business schools and a lot of professional advisory that you can always tap into. The biggest part of leadership, or more interesting one for me, is really the how part, which is how do you then inspire the confidence of your team, the confidence of all of your stakeholders to be inspired by your leadership, to be inspired to buy stock in your company or to follow you and invest in you. And that for me is the part that leadership is all about.
So it's about inspiration for you. And I think that is very apt and in the context of when I look at Priscillah and the person that I met actually quite recently, and just the conversations that we've had so far, you really do come across as a very inspiring individual. Now you're sitting in a very important role and quite senior. You've been around the block, and you've ascended to quite an interesting space in your career. What are those contributing factors that have contributed to you ascending to the role that you're in now?
I think there are a number of attributes. Firstly and most importantly, that's why I always talk about inspiration. It's how do you build the capabilities that you need to be successful in your career, and really deepen that and anchor your career accordingly. So that for me was quite important. And I've been extremely fortunate and privileged to work for companies that gave me opportunities to deepen that part. The second part of that was then how do I then build a capable team, including network teams that I can always tap into, that can help me shape the purpose, the vision that I might have in terms of my business that I was leading or that I continue to lead, because that becomes quite important as well, because you cannot do this on your own. It's a collective. So when do you start that vision, but when do you co-create, and who do you co-create with? Are those the people that will be able to bring a different perspective and in dialogues, or are these people who will actually just be same thinkers as you? So that diversity of thoughts, age, and disruption is very important. And you need to invite it, and you can only invite it by being vulnerable and have the ability to listen to different thoughts and apply your minds to that. So that's really what has really shaped me. But most importantly is also to have fun. So I work for an environment where I can be myself, be authentic, because I'm finding it very difficult to be a different person at home and at work. So I am who I am, and I don't negotiate, I don't change. So before I join any organization, I look at their values, and I do a lot of understanding of not necessarily their values in terms of the integrated report or what you see externally, but do some homework, understand what they're actually living every day. What is the tone that is set from the top? And because that for me is very, very important, because then if the values are aligned to mine, then I can be authentic, I can be myself. So those are the things that I've really tapped on. And from a personal development perspective, I continue to really put that as a focal point in terms of mentorship. Equally so within the business, I've had the privilege on almost most businesses I've worked with to have sponsors as well. And that helps me to identify some of the blind spots. But I also look at different people, my peers, and at times even at a lower level, so that I can walk in their shoes and feel that pain that they're feeling, because only then you can understand your impact on others as well. So how do you invite the constructive dialogues, the constructive feedback, and how do you grow as an individual?
And you mentioned quite a number of important things. I'll just highlight some that stood out from what you were saying to me is what is important to you is the organization itself and that alignment of values. But you also talk about, in terms of you leading a team and building a team, that co-creation and diversity. Do you think that that is something that you would see more in female leaders, or are you seeing it across the board, that notion to see co-creation and diversity as important factors in leadership?
I don't see it across the board. But I do starting to see that people apply their minds now to it in a certain way. But it takes courage to challenge the status quo, but also to be vulnerable, because when you open yourself to diverse views and want to bridge group thinking, it means that you're equally willing to be challenged and be vulnerable. So most leaders avoid that. So you'll hear most of us talking about it, but it's theoretical. In application, it's very rare. It's difficult, and I haven't mastered it. I'm learning it every day. But I make sure, I mean, even this new job that I have now, as I had an opportunity to create a team, I've really brought diversity into it, whether it's female, push hard, as well as Africans and white people, so that, you know, we've got the female, we've got the right diversity, we've got the right dialogues, while tapping on the capabilities that we have. Because you can't sit back 20 years or 25 years later in South Africa post-apartheid and talk about capability and competencies of a certain part of our community. It's unacceptable. So, and if you do that, you're perpetuating it. But most importantly, you're depriving the organization the opportunity to tap on different thoughts. And I'm really energized. And if I look at the level of energy and time that I'm now spending with my new team and how inspirational they are, I just know that I've got a team that is going to help us really forge a successful delivery and story for our business.
And the other thing that you mentioned is having fun. So, like having fun in a senior VP role. What does that mean? What does fun in the workplace mean for you?
I think it's just making sure that whatever you do resonates with you. It's simple. You celebrate the successes and you recognize people more often. Even that small milestone, that's just saying thank you, just recognizing people. But as well, just pausing for a laugh. You know, you don't have to be serious all the time. It just it's too heavy. So I'm that kind of a person that if you're wearing a lovely shoe and I love it, I'll tell you and we can talk about it. But equally so, I'm driven, I deliver, but I don't want this to be heavy. I want people to work in an environment which is conducive, where they can interact, they can dialogue, but have fun together, celebrate successes, help each other, care for each other deeply. If it's my birthday, celebrate it. So that, I think it's one some of those simple things, but you get to know each other personally. And if I'm having a bad day, you can see that today is actually bad for her. And then you can step in and support.
And you and I think it's important. I fully agree with you. I mean, you use the word heavy, otherwise it's heavy. And I'm sure that in the leadership role and roles that you've been in, you've had to do some heavy lifting. So in that context, what would you say has been your biggest challenge as a leader? And can you talk a little bit about how you've dealt with it?
That's a good question. I don't think I'll say I have one particular question as a leader. But what I found difficult is lack of authenticity and honesty. And in organizations, at times we think if we are complying with the law, if we are complying with our policies, it's good enough. My personal purpose in life is to always do something beyond what is written and really live by it, because I think it's very, very important. And I can give you a few examples. If you have to make a difficult commercial decision, do you do it because commercially is the right thing to do? Yes, you should. But how do you think about the ethical aspect of it? How do you think about the other elements of it in terms of the broader societies and your impact on them? So those are the things that we wrestle with every day, and having to balance those interests and still ensure that you come up with the most optimal solution that considers others. And you might not necessarily decide in their favor, but at least consider them in your process thinking. It's a similar thing when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, particularly on the transformation. Over the years, we've been driving this because government is forcing us to comply with the law. And that's the sad part. And you see that as a result, we don't build the capability, we don't develop the talent ourselves in our businesses. And when we are about to have a gap in terms of our matrices, then we go out. We start looking for people. Where are those people going to come from if we don't grow them? So we have to be intentional about these issues. So that's the part of being honest, trusted, as a business partner in any world and country you operate within. And I just found that companies don't invest sufficient time on that. And it goes back to my issue about how do I look at the values of a company? What do they drive? Is it just about a scorecard? Is it about compliance with the legislation when we deal with issues of environmental, et cetera, et cetera? Or is it knowing that it's the right thing to do? We have to do it for the economy, for the country, because we are hosted here. And then our companies will grow after that, because it's not this or that, it's an and. I don't know if I answered you, but it's just,
Yeah.
so it's a number of things that challenges me, where we say something and we do something, or we do something without being authentic about it, without challenging ourselves, because we're self-centered, which is not bad to have personal interest, but we need to understand it's not sustainable.
And I think you're making a very important point, as leaders, understanding that you are running an organization that is part of society, and making sure that the organization is a good corporate citizen. But you touched on something that's very close to my heart, and that is not enough organizations understanding their responsibility within the collective. So if we're going to create a country with skilled people, or enough skilled people, I should say, then everybody's got to chip in, and there has to be some investment in time in that. And the other thing that you've also said that's very close to my heart is talking about ethics and being honest about the ethical implications. in the decisions that you make and the actions that you take. I refer to ethics intelligence, and for me, ethics intelligence is your ability to see the ethical implications in the actions, in the decisions, and also your ability to navigate through ethical dilemmas in such a way that you ensure that you minimize harm. That doesn't matter which stakeholders are in the picture, that you minimize harm all around. And
Mm.
of course, at the center of that is empathy. Um, if I don't look at things with empathy for others, then it becomes very easy to allow self-interest to overshadow everything else. So those are those.
And
Mhm.
sorry, I was going to say that is so true. And the other part is that not any person can say they don't have biases. We do.
Mm.
You're just human being.
Yeah,
But it's your ability to understand your triggers for those biases and also understand when they're getting in the way. And you're not necessarily an ethical and consistent person, or you might be ethical, but you're not consistent. And that is very, very important. And those are some of the challenges as leaders we always have to be mindful of, because our teams don't, or anyone we speak to, don't follow what I say in terms of my corporate citizenship or whatever. They follow my actions. I set
yeah.
the tone. And we like these beautiful words that we use, but when you have to go back and say, what does it really mean? How do you make it personal for yourself? How do you live by it every day? And how do you reflect on it as well and continue to grow?
Mm. You remind me of a short conversation I had on Twitter the other day, which got me to think a little bit deeper about our expression of ethics within the context of leadership. The somebody said, if you're talking about an ethical leader, you're talking about perfection. And I was like, no, it's naive to think that any of us
Exactly.
are perfect, and it does take a very special person to have the amount of brutal honesty with self to recognize your own biases and where you may be justifying the indefensible at times. But it got me to think about whether we should be talking about ethical people as opposed to seeing ethics as something that you apply. So you apply ethics within the context of your thinking in terms of your decisions and in terms of your actions, as opposed to saying to people, you're talking about ethical people, because it does, for me, almost doesn't leave room for the flaws of humanity that
Mm,
sit in all of us, because a lot of people refer to me as an ethics guru. And I'm like, the minute I hear that, I go, oh my God, don't do that.
mm. Yeah.
Because
No,
you don't give me room to
I
make
agree.
mistakes.
Yeah, but I mean, the other part though, which you should be proud of being called that, is that you make mistakes, you acknowledge them, and you can go and apologize, because that's really about it. I know, I'm not saying you're perfect. It's just saying I'm a human being. I'll apply my mind to all of these conflicting interests and other complex matters that influence my decisions,
Yeah,
and I'm going to get it wrong. But when I do, and from my personal reflection or someone's reflection, I realize I've done something wrong.
yeah,
How do I respond to it?
yeah.
And that's really what matters at the end of the day.
No, absolutely. So can I ask you to just cast your mind back over your career? Um, and if you were to look back in the past and you look at where we are now, what changes have you seen that are posing new challenges for leaders today?
I mean, I must just let me start locally first. And I'm saying basically for us, the economy, I wouldn't say it's a change. It's we have found ourselves in very challenging economic environment, as you know. COVID has just added an additional challenge for all of us. But it's difficult to say we did not anticipate this 10 years ago, because it will mean that we are naive. So, and that's the reality of our own inaction that has resulted in where we are today. So that's the first part that I'll recognize. And then the question then is, what is our role, rather than sit back and blame government this? And I used to say to my friends, especially when I was in the UK, that I almost became an alcoholic, because on a Friday evening or Saturday, depending on what time you finish, you host a dinner, and we're all talking about South African politics, and yet we're not doing anything about it. So we cannot, as an entire system, separate ourselves to where we find ourselves in economically, to say did not have a role to play, and we did not have an opportunity to raise a voice. So that's one part that we really need to start thinking about it. And it's quite exciting to see what the role of business now, and how we are positioning ourselves as businesses to say, how do we shape South Africa? How do we play in terms of that? Where are the resource and capability gaps, and how can we close that going forward? And it's a good start, and we need to build on that, but move with speed, accelerate, and ensure that we stop having like talk shops. They are implementable solutions that we follow through, because we need to leave a sustainable legacy for our kids. So that for me is one part. But what is more scary for me is that the world is changing rapidly, much more faster. The new technology, we see the disruption of digital. In our industry, the entire energy business is going through repurposing itself and changing significantly. All of those dynamics are going to create new opportunities, but also intense challenges for us in terms of skill set. So how do we then navigate the today while we're shaping what we need very soon, which is not far from where we are today? And I think that's the challenge of every leader, and particularly for our country. But as a such, I do believe that we've got the capabilities, with the right mindsets and the courage to speak up, to challenge and take a stand, we will achieve a lot.
You know what I like about what you say, and it seems like a theme that keeps on coming through in your responses, is this honesty. Being honest with self, but also organizations being honest. Honest about the fact that we haven't done what we should have done. Being honest about where we are now, being honest about how we're contributing positively or negatively, and being honest about the fact that you're part of an ecosystem, that you can't think in isolation. But and also what I'm hearing very clearly coming through is this challenge to organizations in terms of, so what are you doing? And in terms of your contribution in shaping where your country is at this given point in time, but where it's going into the future. So now in that context, can I ask you this question? What do you see as non-negotiables in terms of leadership skills that leaders must have today?
I think adaptability is important. Our world is changing. I mean, change. One colleague of mine said, "Change is the only constant thing," and I agree with them. So you have to adapt, and have the wisdom to take your organization with you as part of that adaptability. So that's very, very important. Authenticity is very important as an individual, so that you know your own capabilities, where do you need to build it, but also how do you lead that organization and shape it in an authentic manner. And earlier on, you spoke about empathy. You can't be a leader today if you cannot be empathetic and care deeply. And this is not about saying it in a stage or a town hall. It's really living it every day. Is understanding, if I make an error today, is it because I come to work to just spend and make those mistakes, or what's on my mind? How can you support me to be better before you start moving to the consequence management? And I had to learn this cultural change, because I come from a school of thought that says disciplinary is important. rigor and relentless delivery is driven by discipline, which I don't disagree with, but that discipline has an element of a human factor into it. So how do we get to that minds and hearts of people? It's not through processes, it's not through systems. They will help us, but they have to be inspired to do the right thing. And you can only do that if you have empathy for people and they connect with you. One of my ex-colleagues usually say, Priscilla, we wear your t-shirt. And at times I actually never understood what it meant. But afterwards, I then realized that they just are there for me and the organization. And as such, they go an extra mile.
Yeah, and I can see that happening. The fact that over time organizations have become so cold, and then we expect people to produce, but we don't give back in terms of dealing with them as human beings. I mean, we deal with people as if they're just resources like computers. And do you think that that may be one of the fundamental issues that female leaders bring to the table, is to get organizations to become a lot more empathy driven?
I would like to think so. And I always have contrast with this issue because my career has been shaped a lot by male leaders. And I always find that most of this growth I've also learned from some of them who have demonstrated the adaptability, the empathy, and the care. I mean, I usually tell people an example when I used to work for Dr. Velem Kog at ESCOM, who shaped my career in so many ways. Our catch-ups were always, most of the time in our check-ins, but starting with me first, as a single mom, how my kids were doing, what do I need to do to make sure that I am not working the excessive hours I used to work? I look after them, and almost coaching and having that dialogue before we start to talk about the hardware things. And that just change your perspective in life. So women, I think generally we come with that, it comes naturally, but there are men who do it very well as well. So yeah, I would just say that it's really about understanding that we are managing diverse teams. Even the men that we used to lead previously are different. I have, colleagues that want to spend time with their kids. They want to be there for their kids and their families. And equally so, they want to forge successful careers. So how do you bring that in if you can't connect with them individually to understand what drives them? Because you need to lead a collective, but also lead individuals as well. So it's difficult for me to say yes or no, but I'll say mothers naturally, we nurture, it comes naturally. But there are also stories I've heard from others in terms of us as female leaders, where we have not demonstrated that empathy. It could just because of courage, a lack of courage, and we can't seize that space and craft it our own way and bring ourselves into it to be authentic with who we are. I don't know.
But
I just did not give you an answer, but
no. I'm very happy with that answer, because
it's just
we've got to be also very, very careful that one doesn't stereotype to such a degree that we don't recognize that it is a continuum.
it is, and so, for example, where I spent almost a decade in BP again. If I have to look at Guy Moyens, who was my leader, and I have to contrast him with some of the female leaders I work with, and it's totally different. But he's a male; he could bring that empathy, care, and even if he was based in Europe, he could so much for the country, and really was an ambassador for our business. So it's individually driven. My request will be, as leaders, we just need to understand that these attributes are important. They might not come naturally for most of us who are driven and we are inspired by excellence, but you have to create the space to grow yourself so that you can actually attract those attributes or develop them going forward.
Now, I've got my eye on the clock. I've got one more question to ask you,
Sorry.
but you've said something that I'm like, I can't help myself. I do want to sink my teeth into this one. Um, and this is connecting leadership within the context of the organization with the leader in the context of society and parenthood. And the thought that went through my head while you were saying that was that when you were talking about being a good parent is if we are so focused on what we need to give to organizations and leading organizations and we neglect the what we should be doing in terms of raising good kids into good adults that should be contributing to society. We may be so focused on this area that we're creating a vacuum on the other side. And to bring about that balance, there probably needs to be a very honest conversation amongst the broader leadership around our responsibilities that span across just one context, and that if we are required to give so much time to one, that as a collective we're actually losing out on the other, and that we will live to regret it in the future. But I just saw that connection there. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. So let me get to the last
Sorry.
question.
Just before you go, and
Yeah,
I kind of agree with you more on that. I think one of the things that we are fortunate about is COVID has accelerated that.
yeah.
It has actually changed ways of working in the most remarkable way. So we have no excuse not to embrace it.
Mm. But I mean, you say no excuse not to embrace it does mean that there has to be conscious application of mind, and that one has to continually evaluate, where am I? Am I
Yeah.
creating an imbalance in society, or am I contributing to a balanced society with a sustainable future? So let me get to
Mm.
that last question, and that is, so we're recording this in for the South African context at the lower end of the scale of the lockdown in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So we're now in lockdown one. Um, and it's been like almost 7 months now that we've been dealing with this. And we've all learned lessons in the process. I mean, I have watched myself transform in areas that I didn't think would happen. If you told me this last year, I would have gone, oh, really? You are absolutely out of your mind. That's not going to happen. And here I am. What are the most important lessons that you've learned during the pandemic and the related lockdown as a leader?
Let me start. Let me start with the things that I need to improve on. Because of the ability to work virtually, I struggle to look after myself as an individual. And now that we are studying, things are starting to settle down, I think it's important as well as we start thinking about, earlier on I mentioned, how do we adapt to the opportunity that COVID has given us. So for me, it's how do I create the space to just go outside in my garden and breathe, and be able to run or walk in the morning. And then I can come and do whatever time I need. So that is very, very important. I mean, the other day I was joking with my colleagues that I can't even have time to go to the bathroom because you just sit for extended period of time. So it's that part that it's a lesson I'm taking out to say I've benefited to work closely to my family. My parents were staying with me during the lockdown. I could go down in the morning and have tea and breakfast with Papa. But thereafter, I am working throughout, and I was actually wishing I could just sit with him in the evening one day and read a story or watch TV with him like I usually do when I have time from work. The days I came back early. So that discipline of you're not rushing to get into traffic, you're not worried about it's getting dark. It can actually just continue. So that discipline is important. How do I bring it back in terms of personal choices and how I manage that? Because that also influences my team on how they're operating. So that's one part. But the exciting part that I'm looking forward to is the adaptability to say you can work anywhere you want, you can be creative. we are human beings. There are times when we want to come together and collaborate, co-create things, and that's what we should use as spaces for going forward. So how do I make sure that I'm actually leveraging on that opportunity that this COVID is going to bring? But a third element is really understanding the differences between the haves and not haves. It's very, very sad. The other time I was in Devon with my daughter just after the lockdown and it opened up and 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 I just was in a shopping center going to buy food, still careful. I have my credit card and I just saw this long queue of our communities to get into a post office to get their grant. It
Yeah.
hit me so hard.
Yeah.
And you start being so mindful of how many people are standing at a traffic light asking for money. How many people, when you go to a Nando's to buy takeaway, are outside of that and trying to get you to buy them food? So the economic impact of this has to challenge us as a community, as a society, to start thinking what we need to do to make this more sustainable. Because it's very, very sad. It's just something that I continue to challenge myself every day. And yet I am privileged, and my kids are privileged. And so, whilst we are struggling that I need to buy a chair so that my back is not impacted, someone is struggling with the most basic thing.
Absolutely, and we so easily forget these things in terms of how fortunate we are in life. And the one thing that I think that the pandemic has done is to really magnify the inequalities, magnify the underlying conditions that we have to deal with. So if one were to tie that back to the conversation that we've had today, is really key to leadership is empathy and understanding our responsibility and our responsibility in the broader society. Priscilla, thank you so much for being so open and willing to share your thoughts with us in this video. I really, really appreciate your generosity. I do hope that everybody who's listened has been able to pick up a few nuggets. This is the first of two conversations with Priscilla. I encourage you to go and listen to the second conversation as well. You would have picked up in this video that she has a wealth of wisdom to share with us, but also go to the rest of the website. There are other conversations there. There are quite a lot of things on the website that you may be able to take back to your organization, but also that you can use to become a stronger leader in wherever you may find yourself, because we all have a responsibility. Once again, Priscilla, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for listening.